Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Today is the fifth lesson. Before we start, I would like to first of all, I would like to thank Marina, my teaching assistant, for launching this Zoom conference. And well, I hope that everything will go okay today. So we'll have 17th century. And before I start, I would like to make some announcements concerning the exams, because there are a lot of you, 150. I plan uh, 10 sessions for your exams, starting from the 8th of December or somewhere at that. I made the announcements on Canvas, so you can follow the announcements. So we'll have 10 lectures. So today is the fifth lecture. So all in all, we'll have 10 lectures, and we'll have additional classes on Wednesdays starting from the 2nd of December. So I plan to end my course, theoretical part of my course, on the 3rd of December. So I plan to say cover all the topics more or less. But in case there are some questions, I'm continuing to work with you on Canvas, analyzing your essays. So I expect all in all 900 essays, so it's quite a lot. And I have to read them and to have a you will have a feedback. I hope I have already read about 30 essays, so I've tried to answer most of you, and so there was, I think, interesting dialogues with some of you. So I think this will continue. So theoretical part of my course is only just a beginning and something igniting, your brains. You remember the Socratic method, mathematics. So my task is not to explain to you everything and to give you all the information that mankind has gathered since its beginning. Okay, so and well, who am I to just possess all this information and to structure it in a proper way? Okay, so of course I'm only one of those men who are trying to do something. So you should well, you shouldn't expect from me the ultimate answers to ultimate questions. Okay, so this is all what I'm saying to you is just for provoking your own line of thought, your own just maybe well, to clarify, maybe help you to clarify your own positions, and maybe if you don't like the stresses that I put, you can put another stresses. So that's all up to you. Okay. Uh, about the definitions of philosophy, yes, Fedosiev, you read my answer. So there are a lot of them. I forgot the first one that was given by Pythagoras. The definition of philosophy is a search for truth. Search for truth. So is something self-evident, you understand? But if you ask me, as Pontius Pilate asked Jesus Christ, what is truth? Then I can't continue with this definition of philosophy, okay?
Yeah, it will become very
The same
complicated,
with
I
the love
guess.
of wisdom. If you say what is wisdom, so we'll get nowhere, okay? So some like the mathematicians argue what is number. What is the definition of number? Yeah. So when Pyotr Madenov, who taught us calculus, he said, I tried to give a definition of number, but academician Delaunay said to me after reading my definition, it seems from your definition that you are the number, but in Russian we say величина, which means quantity, okay, more or less, yes. So, or magnitude. So he said, from your definition, I could see that you are the magnitude, or you are the something uh, heavy. Well, how can I say величина in English? Well, amount, or well, this well, I think it's not easily translated into
Maybe, yeah, it's really like valuable for
valuable. Okay,
society.
let's say that you are a valuable yourself. Okay,
Yeah.
from your definition of valuable, I can say that you are valuable yourself. So this is a joke. You understand that it seems that well, we can also remember the definition given to point by Euclid. Point is the thing that has no parts. Okay,
Mhm.
okay, so it is, if you think about that, you can see that these definitions lack something, okay, lack something of self-evidence. So we'll start today with the
Thank you.
17th century already, because it's 9 o'clock. The first hero of our talk is Galileo. Okay, so I will give you some information about Galileo. Value. Oh, yes, value. Yes. So, okay. So I think, well, we can say that Galileo is a value, or in Russian, величина. Okay. Something important in the history of science, and his contribution is, I think, invaluable. Okay, if we can just play with words. Okay, so Galileo was born in 1544 in Pisa. Well, a small town, maybe insignificant, but at that time, not so, because Pisa possessed one of those ancient universities. A map of those universities I showed you during my third lecture. So you could see that there were quite a lot of universities in Europe, in very small cities, insignificant now they are, but they possessed university tradition. And so Galileo finished this Pisan University, or University of Pisa. But it is interesting that he received a degree in medicine. So, um, well, not so exactly, because he had to leave the university without finishing it, and so he didn't um, defend his thesis in medicine. So, well, he studied medicine in Pisa, but then he returned to this university already in a quality of a professor of mathematics. Well, not exactly. I explained to you that mathematics was not then used in the same sense. So there were so-called four subjects, quadrivium, which means arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. So Galileo taught on the faculty of arts, okay? So where there are 7 liberal arts. Well, but he preferred to teach mathematics because he was very talented in this field. And also he wrote, while teaching in Pisa, he wrote his first treatise, which is called De Motu in Latin, which is on motion. So this is approximately 1590. Well, what is interesting about this his treatise? He criticized Aristotelian idea of motion through some media, because according to Aristotle, the less dense is the media, the more high is the speed of falling. So, and the more dense is the media, the lesser is the speed. So there is a kind of inverse proportion, okay, between the speed of falling in the medium and its density. But well, at that time it was already known that the law of Archimedes, that say some well, some objects do not fall in water but just float on it. So this somehow this law of Aristotle should be corrected, because say when well, both say a brick of wood is falling in air, and say a brick of plumber is also falling in, or lead is falling in air, but lead continues to fall in water, while the brick is not falling in water but just floating on its surface. So something has to be added to this law of Aristotle. This I'm citing more or less the words of Galileo himself. You can easily find them in this treatise De Motu, which is translated, I think, in English. So you can see well, in details the arguments. What I want to stress is that they are all anti-Aristotelian. So Aristotle begins to fade, sort of. Galileo understood that Aristotle shouldn't be taken in face value. I can to use the word value. Yes, to take something in face value or by face value means to take somebody as it is. Okay, so there should be some critical approach to Aristotle. He proved to be wrong in this circumstance, but maybe he is wrong in other circumstances also. So we need a critical revaluation of all Aristotelian heritage. That's for the professor of the universities quite at that time, I would say, a bold idea, because all education at that time, I mean, at the end of the 16th century, was built on Aristotle. So Aristotle was the like the peak, the acme, well, to which everybody tended. So to understand, and I've read some essays of yours, and in one of the essays it was also the same idea that Aristotle is the wisest man who was ever living on earth. So you should just imitate Aristotle and not presume to be more smart than Aristotle. Okay, so well, Galileo was not of this opinion. Later he would say that thousands of Aristoteles and thousands of Demosthenes will be sort of thrown from their saddle by at least well, mediocre mind who uh, happened to find the truth. Okay, so if you happen to find the truth, Aristotle is no obstacle for you. Because this truth is something better than all those lies which you find in Aristotle. Well, Aristotle didn't lie consciously; he was just in error. But the error of Aristotle, well, if well, we can say Aristotle is a genius, but geniuses also can be so mistaken. Okay, so what is important is the truth, and if you, being mediocre, being not so smart as Aristotle, found the truth, for example, in one um, just maybe modest part of science, so your opinion or your proofs should be preferred to the authority of Aristotle. That was the just the intention. And you see, the intentions was to criticize Aristotle, to find maybe some other mistakes in his teaching. So we can say that starting from this De Motu, or on the motion treatise, I'm sorry, Aristotle was, I'm sorry, uh, Galileo was anti-Aristotelian. Okay, when there are a lot of names just in my brain, I sometimes mix them up. This is, I think, due to some defect in my brain, that it cannot hold too many names. If also your computer, if you open too many Windows on your computer, perhaps it can start working slower. Okay, so this is when I open the window Aristotle, then I open the window Galileo, and sometimes, the brain says it's enough. Okay, you should close the unnecessary windows. So we'll open only two of them, Aristotle and Galileo. So that will be enough. So there will be throughout the life of Galileo, there will be this incessant polemics with Aristotle. So it started in 1590 when Galileo was only 26 years old. So he was a young man. You know, many things are done by young men. For example, if we take special theory of relativity, it was also written, this treatise was written by Einstein when he was 26. So you should get ready to start your own discoveries. Don't Because if you lose this precious time of young age, perhaps you will just never do anything at all. Okay, so this young age is very important. So you see, Galileo started to criticize Aristotle when he was only 26 years old. Well, he taught for a while in this university, but then he changed the university. He came from Pisa to Padua, or Padua. Well, it happened in 1592. Well, you can say, what is the difference? Two small, insignificant Italian towns. We have no Italians here, so nobody will be scandalized, okay? In my previous courses, I had some Italians, and I know that Italians exist, not only just generally in Italy, but they exist in Skoltiach, okay? So they can be scandalized if I will call their towns insignificant, okay? Like, Englishmen say, what an insignificant town of Novgorod, well, for example. Well, I say Novgorod is insignificant, but it's very old. It possesses treasures, some churches, or, pieces of art. The same with Pisa and its famous tower, and with the same with Padua and its famous cathedral devoted to Saint Anthony, and also Cappella Scrovegni with frescoes of Giotto. So there's a lot of to be seen in Padua. Okay, but of course there's also, when I just walked through the streets of Padua, it was long ago, in 1995, I found the street Via Galileo, so the street named after Galileo. So in this Padua, they remember that Galileo taught there for 18 years. So he taught in Paduan University from 1592 to 1610. So for 18 years. And it was happy time for him, because he received quite a large salary from this university. In Pisa, he received a small salary. So in Padua, his sort of situation, material situation financial situation was improved. And also, what we can say about also Pisa and Padua, just to finish this subject of the universities. You know that in Florence, there was a university, but it was not significant because the best professors were in Pisa. Because Florentine Duchy of Florentine Republic, we mentioned that, the academy, and so well, its capital was Florence, but the university city was Pisa. So all the citizens of the Florentine Republic, if they wanted to get a good education, they went to Pisa to study in the University of Pisa. There was a school in Florence which was like affiliation of the University of Pisa, but the professors were the same. So Pisa was the intellectual center of the Florentine Republic, and later to the Duchy of Tuscany. Okay, so it changed names, but in essential it's remained the same. like independent state in the center of modern Italy, with the capital of Florence, with Florence as the capital. So, and Venice, or Venetian Republic, was another independent state with a capital of the capital of which was Venice. But the same situation in Venice, there was no university. All the Venetians went to study to Padua. So in Padua, Padua was the university city of the Republic of Venetia, Venetian Republic. At that time, Venetia possessed a lot of colonies. For example, the island of Kretas, which was called Candia. So this was this island of Kretas, or in Russian Crete, belonged to Venetia, Venetian Republic, and also other islands, and they had even colonies in the Crimea, well, in the 14th century. So Venetians were almost everywhere. And well, so, but their university center was Padua. So you know that Venetia was a very rich republic, so it could afford to pay well to the professors of their university. So University of Padua was famous for good salaries of their professors. Well, and it was in Padua that Galileo started his telescopic observations. And that's why his first book, Sidereus Nuncius, I think Sidereus Nuncius, which was published in Latin. Well, Nuncius, I think, like that. So what is that? Starry messenger in English. So Nuncius is like also, even now it's the name of the ambassador of the Vatican, Nuncius. Okay, so well, we can translate this word as ambassador, but usually it's translated as starry messenger. This is a normal translation. Well, also, nuncius is a person who delivers some news, because nunciare in Latin means to announce. Okay, this is the same as announce. You understand? Announce in English. So announce the news, nuncius, nunciare, they are of the same root. So messenger is very well, very good translation. But also you should keep in mind that nuncius was also ambassador of the Holy See, or of the Vatican, to different countries. So this word has some ecclesiastical connotation. Sidereus, Sidus Sideris is in Latin star. So Sidereus Nuncius is like an ambassador from the stars, okay? You can say. Stars sent their ambassador with some news for humans. So this title seemed quite provocative, okay? So this book was published in Venice because at that time Galileo worked in Padua, and Padua was a part of Venetian Republic, so there was easy to gain access to Venetian typographies or printing presses. So and that was, well, there yesterday when I prepared my lecture, I found a curious mistake in Russian Wikipedia article about Galileo, because there was written that the Sidereus Nuncius was published in Florence. Well, I had to check. I remember that it was published in Venice because I held this book in my hands, but it was long ago. So I just found the book, the title page of this book, the first edition, in Google Books, and just correct. And there's also a Starry Messenger article in Wikipedia, and there, of course, is the title page of the first edition, and it's written Venetis, well, in Latin. So I had to correct this. This is a so I had to correct this Wikipedia article in Russian. I don't know whether they preserved my correction. I will look it after this lecture will be ended. So, well, usually they, if they are responsible people, they understand that this is really a mistake. This is not a joke of mine, you know. But here we are. So Venezia. So this is in Italian it's Venezia. Well, in English it's Venice. I think like that. Well, so okay, so it is 1610. So we have specified the place of edition, and now about the contents. The contents was revolutionary, we can say without even double commas. So revolutionary in what respect? That it contained 4 discoveries. First discovery is that the surface of the moon is rough. It's not polished like it was supposed by Aristotle, because Aristotle supposed that the moon consists out of ether, the fifth element, the perfect element. So it seems that I've introduced you in this mystery of sublunar world and heavenly world, this dichotomy. uh, well, I can again remind sublunar. Sublunar. So there's something. Well, it exists in Arabic language, of course. I was informed that it exists in Iranian language. Yes, sublunar. So under the moon. Okay. Remember this discussion. Did we have it? Yes. So sublunar, it means under the moon, but the moon itself is not sublunar. Okay, the moon itself belongs to another sort of set, or to another domain that's heavenly, which made out of ether. So moon itself is made out of ether. Well, the discussions about the supposed roughness of the moon I found already in the 14th century, say with Jean Buridan. Just to explain, Jean Buridan. This is maybe he's remembered because of the Buridan's S. Uh, that this S dies of hunger because he couldn't select between 2 equally distant heaps of say hay, or I don't know what they eat, the asses. Maybe it's avios, but I forgot how it is. Oats, yes, like that. So equally distant heaps of oats, and he couldn't just uh, make a choice because he's like at a loss from which uh, turn his head to the right or to the left, and so he dies of hunger. This Buridan's S. But Buridan was a very professional philosopher, and he wrote commentaries or questions on Aristotle's works on the sky or on physics also. And there he put this question: why the moon sort of is luminous? What makes it luminous? It reflects how to say, the light of the sun. But how can a polished surface reflect the light of the sun? If the surface of the moon was polished, like, you understand, it couldn't have reflected the light of the sun as it reflects it in reality, because it seems that the moon reflects the light of the sun like the wall, but the wall is rough. So there's a difference between the wall and the mirror. The mirror reflects light in one way, the wall reflects the light in another way. Okay, we can say now that the light is somehow dissipated on the surface of the wall, but not on the polished surface of the mirror. So this question, why the moon seems to reflect the light of the sun as the wall and not as the mirror, and how, but the wall is rough and the mirror is polished. So this question already arose, was put in the 14th century. But Buridan wanted to save Aristotelian world, this dichotomy, so he proposed an interesting solution, that the surface of the moon is in first potency to give light. So as when it receives light from the sun, it starts to illuminate itself and produce its own light. Okay, so you see this, what we now call photoluminescence. Okay, so well, of course, it's a very artificial explanation, but that was made in order to save Aristotelian idea of dichotomy, which was, of course, very precious for medieval men. So, well, Galileo didn't have any inclinations to save Aristotelian ideas, so he already knew that Aristotle could be wrong, so he didn't spare Aristotle. He just produced this idea that the surface of the moon is really rough. And his telescopic observations of 1910, or I'm sorry, of 1610 proved that. He even found mountains on the on the moon, and even he declared that he observed some shadows of those mountains. Okay, so now the question seemed to be solved. So dichotomy is to be said goodbye. Aristotelian dichotomy starting from 1610 ceased to exist. So the question was solved even before the Americans launched their expedition to the moon in 1969. So even earlier, this question was already solved. So now this is the cornerstone of Aristotelian worldview, this dichotomy, this division between sublunar and heavenly. So now Aristotle's world is falling to pieces, you understand, with that discovery of Galileo. And Galileo was smart enough to understand that. So he understood that he had just like crashed like the precious cup or a precious vase. Okay, so this was like it was shattered to pieces, like you understand. Well, then followed other discoveries. He discovered four satellites of Jupiter, and he was, I would say, prudent enough to name them Medicean stars in honor of Medici. So he immediately received the very good post of the Duke's astronomy of Medici. So he immediately returned to Florence after these discoveries. He said goodbye to Padua University, to Venice, and returned to his homeland, to Florence, to Tuscany, to Florence Duchy, to already with a very important and very well paid position of the private astronomer or court astronomer of the dukes. Okay. No, well, about this hint from the 14th century, well, people are arguing about that because the historians of science has found in the copybooks or diaries of Leonardo da Vinci their references to the edition of Albert of Saxony, who was also the pupil of Buridan and belonged to the same school. So maybe these editions, well, Buridan was not published. I mean, the works of Buridan were not published, so they remained in manuscripts. They were published only in the 20th century when the historians of science started to analyze them. So now we have the publication dating 942 It was published by American historian of science, whose surname is Moody. So if you take Moody, Buridan, and 1942 and Google it, you will find the exact edition and can have a PDF of it. I have read it in a printed version already in the somewhere at the end of the 80s when the perestroika started. I worked in the library of the Institute of Scientific Information and for the social sciences near Metro Profsоюзная, so I held it in my hand. Well, now it is not needed. You could just see it on your computer and can copy it also and work with it. Also, the deficiency of this book is that it's written in Latin, okay? So that's, you should master Latin a little bit to understand all these, subtle questions and answers, because you see this also these medieval schoolmen were a little bit different in their mentality from normal 21st century scholars. So you have to but of course there's a lot of literature in English language. So you can read Moody himself and other historians of science like Sambursky or Edward Grant. So there's a lot of the essence of Buridan's ideas were published in English in the 20th century. So it's very easy to find these essential parts of Buridan's works, heritage in English. Especially his idea of impetus or his idea of momentum. Uh, Anaxagoras, yes, Anaxagoras was before Aristotle. So, and Democritus perhaps also thought that the moon is made out of atoms. So he was also against this dichotomy of heavenly and sublunar. So I don't know why the medieval people choose Aristotle to be their guide in everything. Why Aristotelian cosmology suited medieval people more than other variants of cosmology. Democritian, atomistic, Lucretius, you remember that there were different approaches. For example, Pythagoras thought that the earth was moving around the central fire. So, mm, uh, yes, I don't know what, postulate geocentrism. Yes, it was the idea of Aristotle. So Aristotle just he used a deductive method. Um, about geocentrism, well, it is, first of all, it's trivial and obvious. So it's easy to imagine that our Earth is immovable, because it seems that the Earth is right, that the moon, that the say that the sun is rising in the east and setting in the west. Okay, so it seems that you shouldn't invent curious or difficult explanations for that simple fact. So maybe it's better to imagine that the sun really moves around the earth and the earth stands still. Well, also there are two motions of the earth. One is rotational motion and another is linear motion, or also, the motion around the orbit or around the sun. So these two motions were introduced by Copernicus in his treatise, of which we spoke last time in my fourth lecture. So now with these returning um, uh, to these satellites of Jupiter, which he called Medicean stars, and received a post in Florence. So these four satellites seem to prove the Copernican system, because according to Copernicus, the Earth moved around the sun, but the moon moved around the Earth. So there's another confirmation that this can happen, because for Copernicus there was only one exception. The moon is moving around the Earth, and the Earth is moving around the sun. Now we have Jupiter, which also moves around the sun according to Copernican system, but there are 4 satellites or 4 moons which move around Jupiter. So this seemed to be like a confirmation or hint that that Copernicus was right after all. So, but I think that, and most of the historians of science think that Galileo was already Copernican in his thought when he started these telescopic observations. So he already embraced Copernican ideas, but he didn't do it in public. And if you take his early works, his Pisan lectures, there he is objecting against Copernicus. So I would say that Galileo underwent a conversion. So as a young professor in Pisa, he was Ptolemaic. Okay, he was teaching Ptolemaic system to his students, and if you take his notices to his lectures, which are published now in the full edition of Galileo's works, you will see that he objects against Copernican system. He doesn't. It didn't seem to him the true system. But later he somehow underwent this conversion. We don't know exactly when, but he ended as a staunch Copernican, but then the church intervened and sort of pressed on Galileo to sort of reject Copernican system, abjure, you know this word, abjure, I think, abjure, yes? So just reject with a solemn oath, okay? So like we say in Russian, отречься, okay? Well, I think more or less it's abjure, but maybe you can find a more suitable English word for that. Reject, we can say. Reject is also goes well. Okay, so now I will answer some questions because there are maybe yes, maybe this idea of purpose and this idea of purpose was more congenial to Christian idea of God's providence, sort of. We can there was some like somehow kind of a alloy between these two parts, Christianity and Aristotelianism. So there was an alloy, and it suited everybody. Somehow Christianity was combined with Aristotelianism, and well, this was well, there were many causes for that. First of all, the world is finite and God is infinite. Okay, so God created a finite world. If you would ask, say, what is the why, if we take, for example, this, I would say, constant, the well, say, well, how do we, if we divide the radius of the sphere of the stars by radius of the earth, we'll receive some number, okay? Well, say it will be 1 milliard or 2 milliards, I don't know. So we can just ask why such is the number and why the universe is such and not the other way around. What makes it specific? This is a question of contingency. Contingency. So, and well, this contingency, I'm sorry, contingency is very provocative to materialists, but for believers in God, it's quite obvious that God willed it this way for his unfathomable purposes and providence. He wanted the earth, the universe to be this and this. Okay, so the same happens now when we have the constant of the fine structure, which is 1 divided by 137. We can ask why it is so, or why the proton is 2000 times more heavy than electron. What is this? What are those figures? What do they mean? So there are a lot of also well, physicists give a lot of explanations. They say that perhaps our universe is one of many which materialized by in this coming through an infinite potential barrier, and so like bubbles, you know, that go through the potential barrier. So this our universe is just has this chance like set of constants, but we can imagine another universe with other constants, and but there is also curious explanation that perhaps these constants are as they are because we exist, the humans who can observe the universe. So this is called anthropic principle. Well, we'll speak about that later, but just I just try to answer the questions. Anthropic principle. So I just try to answer these questions: why Aristotelian cosmology was so dear to medieval and Renaissance sort of worldview principle. Well, I think that this its finiteness and its contingent character was a very well sort of um, connected with the Christian worldview, which was paramount in that times. Well, I think you are a little bit tired, or we can make a 5 minutes break before we come to the second part of Galileo's biography. I only add that there were two other observations made in 1610. The third one being the Milky Way. Well, the Milky Way was already known and named Milky or Galactos. Galactos is milk in Greek. Gala is nominative case, Galactos is genitive case. Okay, so a galaxy comes from the Greek word which means milk. In Russian we also have Mlечный путь. Mleko is old Slavonic for молоко. Okay, so milk. So this is, but it was thought that there was some milk there spilled by some goddess. Okay, now we instead of milk there were a multitude of tiny stars. Okay, so that could lead Galileo to the idea that perhaps these stars are far away and only seem tiny because they are far away and not because God created them tiny. Okay, but there were two explanations. This is what not a decisive one. Okay, for infinite universe, but it was already an omen. And the fourth was the rings of Saturn. But the ring was later found by Huygens, who used a more like a better telescope. With the telescope which used Galileo, he could only see Saturn as a combination of three stars, one big central star and two little stars at the sides, okay, on the right and on the left side. And he even gave a little picture of what he saw in this Sidereus Nuncius. So if you open this book, you can find this picture, or you can just open the Wikipedia article, the Star Messenger, and see all those pictures there. So, well, so now we have ended with this fateful year, 1610. which sort of changed the fortunes of Galileo. He now was worldwide celebrity. His starry messenger was read in England by, for example, the poet John Donne, a famous English poet. He already wrote, oh, I'm sorry, read um, John Donne, I think like that, maybe like that. John Donne. So the famous English poet, famous for his words, "No man is an island, and for whom the bell tolls." Okay, the novel of Hemingway. Those for who like literature, and also one of the just um, how to say, beloved poets of Joseph Brodsky, who translated some, who wrote the Elegia or to John Donne. Okay, so this is a, well, it is interesting that this poet, although not a professional astronomer, read already the Starry Messenger, uh, I think in 1611, and meditated on it. So, and later John Donne also bewailed the, like, the crash or the annihilation of this finite, cozy Aristotelian universe, that all fell to pieces. Okay, this is the citation from John Donne. The old world sort of fell to pieces, and man feels like he has been ousted out of his house. Okay, or uh, well, chased away from his house, cozy house. Okay. Well, just 5 minutes I ask you, and then we'll continue, okay? Um, okay, let's continue with Galileo. And what happened later? So in 1613, um, uh, Galileo published his letters on sunspots, now in Italian language, not in Latin. Um, I don't know why did he change. Maybe Latin was difficult for him. Star Messenger is a small book, so he could have afforded to write it in Latin, but perhaps his master of Latin was not perfect, so he preferred to write his other works in Italian language. So these letters on sunspots were written in Italian. And here he, well, he was very much uh, he considered these sunspots to be the proof of heliocentrism, that somehow he thought that these sunspots prove that the Earth rotates around its axis and moves around the sun. Also, he thought that the tides also are proof that the Earth is moving. So, well, maybe he was not quite right in that, but he wanted to find some sort of proofs of the Earth rotation and the Earth moving around the sun. You know, these proofs are not easily to be found. We all remember the negative result of Michelson's experiment in the 19th century. So it's not so easy. Well, of course, there are parallaxes of the stars which can sort of prove it. But at that time, the telescopes were not so sophisticated as to find the parallax of the stars caused by the rotation of the Earth around the sun. So also the cause of this rotation was not known. The hypothesis of universal gravity was not yet formulated. So, well, it was only this Copernican principle that the sun is like mm, the lamp which the creator has put in the center of the world. So these were these Neoplatonic, say, ideas of the sun as the symbol of God, of Neoplatonic one, and so on. So maybe that inspired Galileo, and also, of course, his astronomical discoveries. Well, but he began to sort of defend Copernican system in public, and he wrote some letters, one to the Duchess of the Tuscany, to the Duchess of Tuscany, and another to a prominent ecclesiastical, a Carmelite monk, Foscarini. So they both agreed with Galileo that something has been changed in our reception of the Holy Scriptures. Well, there are several um, examples when the Holy Scripture, the Bible, speaks about the motion of the sun. So, for example, I will cite uh, Psalm. I'm sorry. Psalm 18. Well, according to previous the numeration of the Vulgata. So what is written there? That the sun uh, goes out of its tabernacle and is eager as a giant to run its course. Okay, so the sun is compared with a bridegroom who goes out of the tabernacle, and also to a giant who eagerly runs its course. Okay, so if we Galileo suggests to interpret these and similar passages in a metaphorical way. He says that, for example, if we take the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, there you can find in the third chapter how God walked around the Garden of Eden, around the paradise. So Galileo says, well, there's written that God walked in the garden, but God has no legs on. You understand? So this should be understood metaphorically, that God walks. Okay, so the same idea he thought to be introduced when we speak about sun moving around the earth. So this is only metaphorical, should be understood metaphorically, but in reality it is the earth that rotates around its axis and causes this apparent motion of the sun. Well, when Galileo started to like dabble in theology, dabble, or just uh, like um, sort of speak about theological subjects, he found important people who were in high church hierarchy and were against this approach. And one of them was Cardinal. Um, you remember Cardinal Nicholas Kuzansky, Cardinal with a red hat, Cardinal. Now it was not Nicholas of Cusa, who would be perhaps more lenient to Galileo if he lived in the 17th century, but there was more sort of, say, reactionary Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. We'll just have to speak a few words about this personality. Uh, Bellarmine is usually pronounced in Bellarmine is in Italian pronunciation, but the Americans say Bellarmine. Well, he is a saint, so there are churches devoted to Saint Robert Bellarmine, and his relics are preserved in Rome in the Church of Saint Ignatius, I think, in the center of Rome. Okay, so he was a Jesuit, a member of the order founded by Ignatius of Loyola in 1540. Well, just I think most of you know who is Ignatius of Loyola, especially Javier from Venezuela, I think, because there are a lot of churches devoted to Saint Ignatius.
That's
Um,
right, yes.
yeah, of Loyola. But the Russians, because we are mostly Orthodox or skeptics, So I found the examples of students who don't know who are Jesuits and who is Ignatius of Loyola, and the Jesuits will be important for us when we'll speak about René Descartes. I hope we'll manage it in the second half of our lecture. Now, when we are speaking about Galileo, Jesuits are also important, especially such Jesuit as Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. So he already in 1611, Bellarmine wrote a letter to Jesuit astronomers who were based in Rome. For example, Christopher, Christopher, Christopher Christopher Clavius. This was a very important astronomer, and Galileo himself gave him a copy of his star messenger and asked his approval of his observations. And Clavius wrote to Galileo that he confirms all his observations, that he himself used the telescope, and he can confirm that all is right, what is written by Galileo in Star Messenger. So, and Bellarmine also wrote a letter not to Christopher Clavius himself, but to all the astronomers of the Roman College, the Jesuit Center of Learning in Rome, and asking them if Galileo is right in 5 important questions. Well, 4 of which we already discussed: whether the surface of the moon is rough, whether the Milky Way consists of a multitude of infinitesimal stars, whether Saturn is a combination of 3 stars, whether Jupiter has 4 satellites, and Bellarmine added a 5th question: whether the Venus has phases or wanes and increases like the moon. Okay, so these phases of Venus were not included in Star Messenger. They were found later in the same year, but I think near the autumn of year 1610. And but by 1911, by 1611, they were already known. So Bellarmine was in course of all that happened with the new astronomic discoveries of Galileo. He was interested. But, well, why? Because as a theologian, he knew how Aristotelian philosophy supported Christian theology and was like taken at face value, okay, by Thomas Aquinas and other important schoolmen. So he was a little bit afraid that with the fall of Aristotelian world cosmology will fall theology or be compromised also theology. So he was already a little bit nervous about that, but he understood as a practical man that nothing can be done if these observations are right, and if the surface of the moon is rough, so we can do nothing with that. This is the will of God, okay, to make it rough and not smooth. So we have to take it as it is and say goodbye to Aristotle in this respect, or maybe other aspects. Well, so not to hold blindly to Aristotle, especially if we take this idea that Jesuits were innovative because they were founded only recently, and they were full of innovative spirit. So for them, Aristotle was not so precious, maybe as for other theologians like the Dominicans. So you understand. But when it came to the interpretation of the Holy Scripture, there Bellarmine became more strict, and he just pressed on the Pope to ban, to say a Copernican heresy, sort of, that there were 2 propositions which were banned by the Church. First proposition is that the sun is in the center of the world and immobile. This was considered to be plain heresy. So a person who teaches that the sun is immobile and is in the center of the world is a heretic. So he has to be excommunicated. The second proposition is that the earth moves by rotation around its axis and by local motion. Well, local motion means motion in space. So this was not considered a heresy, but was considered as a mistaken faith. Well, it's just will that will have consequences when we'll start to speak about René Descartes, how René Descartes evaded an accusation of heresy in his life. Well, so now these two propositions were formally denounced by the church, prohibited to be held, and this happened in February 1616. So Galileo was summoned to Rome because Bellarmine knew that Galileo was a secret adherent of Copernicus, and he was asked to abjure these two propositions and to sort of uh, um, uh, to promise not to defend these propositions in public. Okay, so Galileo signed this agreement, and he was silenced for Galileo was silenced for 16 years. Now, what happened after? In 1621, Bellarmine died. And well, he was not a bad man, you see, which can be well. Pierre Bayle, a Protestant himself, wrote in his dictionary about Bellarmine that when Bellarmine died, he was annoyed by flies, flies, and people wanted to kill those flies, and he said, well, don't kill them, let them fly, and let them even disturb me, because they have no heaven, no eternal life. Only all their bliss is in flying where they want and setting where they want, stopping where they want. So this is their the only bliss that is allowed to these flies. So don't disturb them, let them fly. So this can be, from this episode, we can see that perhaps he was a kind man he had some personal kindness. Okay, so but with the question of Galileo, with the question of heliocentrism, he decided to be firm and to stop this sort of heresy, because it compromised the consensus of all the interpreters of the Bible, because the majority, of course, like John Chrysostom or Thomas Aquinas or others, they, of course, when they commented on the Psalm 18 or other passages from the Bible dealing with the motion of the sun, they of course took it literally. So Bellarmine said that until invincible proofs are found that the earth is moving, it's better to just hold to this idea of geocentrism. Okay, well, this was his personal opinion, and this was an opinion of the Holy Office, not of the church itself. So these decrees were later abolished by already in the 19th century, and definitely abolished by Pope John Paul II in 1992. So Galileo was officially rehabilitated from this accusation of heresy. So what it took, you see, more than 350 years, okay? So, but then Bellarmine died. This episode with flies was over. So Galileo and the new pope was elected, Urban the eighth, who was a personal friend of Galileo, and so Galileo decided that perhaps times had changed, and he could afford to risk once again to speak about Copernican system? Well, he decided to do it like in an article or treatise which he called the dialogue about the tides. For him, tides were most important proof of the rotation of the Earth. But Urban the Eighth, when he heard from Galileo this proposition to write uh, well, Galileo asked Urban the Eighth, the Pope, to permit him to publish the dialogue about the tides of the Earth. And Urban the Eighth said, well, why should you choose this title, a dialogue about the tides? Better write a dialogue about two world systems, Copernican and Ptolemaic. So, well, Galileo on hearing that was exhilarated, was very enthusiastic. He said, perhaps the Pope will change this definition of Bellarmine, and so the new times will start. So he eagerly started to write this dialogue in Italian. Well, just I will answer the questions of Valeria Kryukova. Uh, uh, you know, Christianity as such, of course, doesn't depend on whether the earth moves or not. But there were passages from the Holy Scripture. For example, if you look at Psalm 18, the book of Psalms, they are in the Bible. So you can see that the Bible seems to say that the sun is moving, okay? So, of course, Galileo proposed the easy solution. Just take these passages from the Bible metaphorically, as they are now taken by the majority of Christians, okay? But the problem was that Bible was commented upon by very saintly and devoted and I would say respected persons like John Chrysostom, which is Russian Ian Zlatoust, or say St. Augustine, Святой Августин, I would call it Блаженный Августин, or Thomas Aquinas, Фома Аквинский. Okay, so these were very celebrated theologians, and if we take that Galileo is right, then it seems that Galileo authority outweighs all the authority of the Holy Fathers. Okay, this seemed to be how a mortal man, a sinner who lived well, who is not a saint, uh, is more close to the truth than all these saintly fathers, doctors of the church, you see. So it seemed improbable to Bellarmine. He thought that it couldn't happen, that a simple man could be more keen in this subject than the majority of the theologians, okay? So this is called consensus patrum. This is a quite a expression, consensus, consensus. Like now we have a consensus of the scientific community, okay? So you cannot be more wise than all those academicians that surround you, okay? When I was a student in physical department of the university, on the second floor there were portraits of famous Russian or Soviet, they were called academicians like Landau, Artsimovich, Velikhov, and others. So I could see, who are you, the simple student, to be more prudent or to be more wise than all those famous authorities, okay? Kapitsa also. So you see that you can be sort of pressed by these authorities. The same was the attitude of the simple Christian vis-a-vis those holy fathers like John Chrysostom, like Thomas Aquinas. Who are you, a simple mortal, to think more profoundly, to dare to say your opinion about the thing that was settled by some great authorities? Okay, that's Valeria. This perhaps all that I can say about this subject. Maybe there are better explanations, but this is my explanation of what happened. Okay, so now we'll return to this meeting of Galileo with the Pope. So the Pope seemed to be lenient, okay? The Pope seemed to be open to a new discussion. So Galileo enthusiastically started to write this dialogue in Italian language. And because Pope was like even gave the title sort of, you see, so he sort of blessed the whole initiative. So, and because the position of Galileo in Florentine Republic, or in, now it was called Duchy of Tuscany, was firm, so the Grand Inquisitor of Florence gave, who acted as a censor, gave permission to publish this work in Italian. So it was published with the permission of the church authorities in Florence officially. And Galileo thought that he has won. But when this book came to Rome and Pope Urban VIII read it, he was furious because he understood that he was sort of mm, uh, somehow tricked. There was a kind of trick of Galileo that he was sort of, you understand, put outsmarted by that. And that Galileo, by writing this dialogue, he sort of crashed all this Aristotelian worldview and also Ptolemaic worldview, and defended ably. So after reading this dialogue, you could have a firm conviction that Copernicus was right after all. Okay, so immediately this book was prohibited. Um, put on the index of prohibited books. Galileo was summoned to Rome and asked to reject this heresy, Copernican heresy, again. And because he was already committed some crime, so as a person suspected of heresy, he was sent to exile. So he had to live in his villa and not be able to visit other cities like Florence or Rome. So he had to stay under, can say, home arrest. Okay, only he was permitted to go to Florence later, but to consult the doctors, because while observing the sunspots, he injured his eyesight and he was almost blind, and so he needed the, let's say, oculist or ophthalmologist, and so he was allowed to visit Florence for several times, just to visit, consult the doctors. But the most of his time he spent on his villa. But he was not. But he was allowed to continue his scientific pursuits only if he promised not to touch on this problem of Copernican system. So he wrote another dialogue, which was dialogue about two new sciences, where he centered or focused on the idea of motion. And these are also very important. And these dialogues were published in Italian. Also, they were published in Holland, in Protestant country. The Protestant country didn't just take into consideration the decrees of Roman Inquisition, or Roman Pope, because Protestants were very much against the Roman Church. So in Holland, there were many publishing houses, and they published eagerly Galileo. Also, they published a Latin translation of Galileo's work, this dialogue, uh, which was translated by two Protestant scientists. And but it is interesting that one edition of this Galileo's work in Latin was published in France, in Lyon. This is interesting because Lyon is in France, and France was at that time a Catholic country. So how it happened that in France in 1641 there could have been published this banned dialogue in Latin. Well, first of all, because it was published in Latin. Secondly, because the French kings did not sort of were not obedient to all the decrees of the Roman Inquisition, because there was a law according to which all the decrees of the Roman Church had to be sanctioned by the French kings. Otherwise, so France was I would say there was some tolerant atmosphere in France at that time due to the absolute power of the French king. So French politics was different from politics of other countries of Italian republics. So in Italy, nobody dared to republish the dialogue of Galileo, but in France and of course in Holland, it was possible. So Galileo was not silenced totally. So he could continue his scientific work, but he was, of course, under close observation, and it spoiled, I think, his last years. Well, he died in Galileo died in 1642. He was allowed to be given a church burial because he repented of heresy. So as a repentant sinner, he was allowed to be buried as a Christian. Well, about his burial in the church, there was some discussion, but now I think his tomb is in some church, but you can see where it is now. And this year was the year of the birth of Isaac Newton, this 1642. Well, I think now I will answer the questions. Yes, about the church monopoly on education, yes, not only in Catholic countries. If we take Protestant countries, of course, Catholic Church had no voice there. I mean, in Amsterdam, in London, in Berlin, or in Hamburg. So at that time, Europe was divided. For example, in Sweden, in Stockholm, Catholic services were prohibited. So there were no Catholic churches open in Sweden. So Protestants, and when the 30 Years' War ended, there was a principle, cuius regio eius religio, so whose reign, those is also the faith. So if a Lutheran prince is reigning, so Lutherans are allowed to have, the Lutheran church is dominant, Catholic church is forbidden. If the Catholic prince reigns, then Catholic church are open, Protestant church are banned. Okay, so of course in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, in say in Bavaria, or other, maybe later in Poland. So in those Catholic countries, of course, Galileo was prohibited. But in Protestant countries, the situation was quite different. In France, there was an exception. We'll speak about René Descartes after a break, and we'll see that situation in France was unique. So it was more liberal than in other Catholic countries. Now, yes, heresy, no. The heresy, formal heresy, was only to hold that the sun is immobile in the center of the world. So this was called heresy, not by the Pope himself, not by the Church Council, but by the so-called Holy Office, or in Roman Inquisition. So this decree was, of course, valid, but not he didn't receive the dignity of the article of faith. Okay, so and later it was revoked. Well, so now it is, if some of you are Catholics, you are not obliged to believe that the central position of the sun is a heresy. But the central position of the sun is now not also a scientific truth. we understand that there's no center of the world and our sun is just one of the stars. So nobody now just holds firmly this proposition that the sun is in the center of the world. Okay, neither Descartes did hold this proposition, neither Newton. So this mm, well, this um, question sort of became not so well, lost its sort of acuteness. Okay, now we'll have a short break also for you because maybe you are tired, maybe for 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes is okay, and then we'll start a new theme. We'll start with René Descartes because René Descartes is also very important as a precursor of Newton and as a philosopher, as a methodologist of science. So I think it is important. Well, let's continue. Uh, so, uh, how can we pass the exam if we not definitely have sent all essays by the exam dates, or it doesn't contradict? Well, uh, you can you can add your essays later because the exams will start on the 2nd of December. So after the 2nd of December, if you haven't submitted all the essays, you can do it later in till the, I think, the 25th of December, you are allowed to write your essays. So if you don't write any essay, you will just have a lower mark because every essay adds, say, 9 or 10, it depends, well, 8 to your mark, okay? Yes, on PowerPoint, yes, better. But you can also speak orally as I now am speaking, just using the chat, or it's up to you. It's not obligatory. Um, I think that somehow Socrates and Plato spoke without presentations, without PowerPoint, okay, and they were somehow understood. So this is like a commodity of the 21st century, but still, I think it somehow distracts attention of people. I mean, these slides, but people ask for slides, and so they like it, and so I try when possible to show them. Today, Marina is feeling not very well, so we are just all sort of out of solidarity with her. We are sort of mortify our senses, and so we are without slides now. This is like a kind of mourning for ill health of Marina, but I hope she will recover and will be with our slides with this PowerPoint presentation next time. So it's up to you. If you want to use PowerPoint for your own presentation or just make a presentation, it's easier for you. And I think for the majority, it's easier. It sort of structures your talk. Then it's okay. If you prefer to speak from the heart or just in prose or in verse, and it's up to you. Okay. So every strategy is invited. Well, yes, where can we? Well, I'm not sure. Well, I haven't yet this idea. So, well, you can just choose the date. And I think the probability theory, or the law of large numbers somehow gets that people are more or less evenly distributed around all those dates. So if, say, on the 13th of December, because 13 is unlucky number, there will be less people than usual. So we can, you will have the opportunity to speak more on your topic or to answer questions, to enter discussion. So I think usually around 10 people are present. So for 10 people, 3 hours is I think the best solution. But if there will be 20 for 3 hours, so you will be limited in your time of your presentations and so on. No, no classic exam. Classic exam is your 6 essays. That will be a classic exam. So essays are about your knowledge of my subject, say ancient science, medieval, Renaissance, and so on. Galileo. So by writing essays, you will show me your abilities, your knowledge of my course. Your final presentation is, I think, well, of course, you can also speak on broad subjects like gender in science or politics, science and politics. It's up to you. But if you speak on your subject, on what you are doing in Skoltech, it is also possible. And maybe the easiest solution for you, because you shouldn't have make a new presentation. You can use your old presentation, only adapt them for this course of history, make it more sort of palatable or easy. Okay. uh, Email address, yes. Okay, just I'm writing here. um, mm, yes. uh, Yes, also, well, we can create a group in Vkontakte, for example, if it is easier for you. So just up to you. If somebody will make this initiative and create the group Vkontakte, as do my students in Moscow Physical Technical Institute. So this is also a solution. Okay, so let's start with the academic material. So we have now René Descartes, a French philosopher and mathematician, and well, I can say a scientist with a capital letter. I think Descartes is not to be introduced. He is well known because all of you know Cartesian system, coordinate system, or in Russian we say Descartova система координат. Cartesian and Descartes are the same. Cartesius is just the Latin name of Descartes. So from this comes Cartesian, Cartesius. Descartes. So he was spelled with two words, Descartes. So if you have the printed edition of his books, you will see that he's called Renatus Descartes. But when you know S is not pronounced in modern French, so we now say Descartes, not Descartes, okay? But the old French pronunciation perhaps allowed this S to be spelled. We don't know how they pronounced words in the 17th century. So because he was born in 1596 and died in 1650. So he was most of his life he spent in the 17th century. Okay. Well, he received his education in a Jesuit college. So we already introduced this topic of Jesuits. Um, Jesuits. Well, who were they? They were monks of newly established order, very innovative. They fought with a Protestant influence, so they understood that in the divided Europe, only one strategy is possible: is to attack, to convert people. So not by force, because they couldn't use arms, but by intellect. So their idea was to found institutions or colleges, um, colleges uh, uh, for children, where they, by means of very sophisticatedly planned education, could form out of them um, I would say, staunch Catholics and even future priests. Not from all of them, of course, but they called in the Catholic usage. Maybe Javier knows it. It's called vocation. Vocation to priesthood. You see, vocation.
Yes, it's true.
Yes. So vocation. So their system of education of the Jesuits was to promote vocations among maybe the most gifted or talented of their students. But also they gave very good, solid education. First of all, in humanities, Latin and Greek, and also, of course, the study of the Bible, but also liberal arts, mathematics, physics, also was added. So there, Descartes gained, how to say, received this. It means like in in German "von," which means out of Cartus, which Cartus is a geographical name. You can find it on the old maps. Now this little city where Descartes was born is renamed after his name. Uh, yes, of course. That's why I explained that his Latin name was Cartesius. So he was cited by Leibniz or other or say Spinoza as Cartesius, and everybody understood it because it was his like Latin variant of his name. But so you shouldn't be, Alexander, you shouldn't be confused. Just take it as it is, like you take the rough surface of the moon. So don't get confused, okay? Just take, this is the common usage of, say, uh, people who sort of write doctor's thesis on Descartes' philosophy even now. So Descartes is very popular among philosophers. Well, of course, philosophers tend to minimize his scientific contribution. They prefer to speak about his celebrate phrase "cogito ergo sum," um, mm, well, and to his theory of the brain and of the soul. But he, you know, this cogito ergo sum. So maybe you had a course in just in philosophy, and maybe already your teacher of philosophy somewhere in Moscow Physical Technical Institute or in Kaliningrad University or somewhere told you about René Descartes as a philosopher, but perhaps no, well, he's little spoken of as a scientist. Well, I prefer to speak about his scientific contributions. And first of all, let's start with his education. So he received a good, not only humanitarian, but mathematical education. So there were able mathematicians in this Jesuit college who taught him essentials of mathematics and logic. So that allowed him to pursue a study of philosophy and exact sciences. Well, but after after graduating from this college, Descartes wanted to sort of absorb himself in the world affairs. He wrote later that he wanted to see like the world as it is, or to read the book of this world, okay? Book of this world, which is not allowed to me now because of the lockdown, okay? Book of this world. So um, so he wanted to just see other countries, so to travel and to see different people. And he thought that perhaps the career of a soldier would be the best solution here, because soldier is by the sort of by his profession somehow can travel much with his army in different places to see different places, and Also in the army you can establish friendships and relations with other people, see how the people are sort of acting in extreme situations. So he considered this career of an army officer a best solution. So he entered the Dutch army. Well, you can ask how a Catholic can enter a Protestant army. But at that time it was possible because this was the problem of salary. So the Dutch were not numerous, and they are still not numerous, but they were very, very wealthy because of their trade activities. So they had enough money to sort of hire the soldiers. Yes, they were called mercenaries. So there's uh, hired soldiers from, and the problem of whether they were Catholic or Protestant was not sort of burning one. So if a person agreed to serve the army, so he could afford to be of different religion than the Protestant religion, the Calvinist religion of the Dutch state. So Descartes entered the Dutch army, and then he changed the army, so he didn't want to continue this contract with the Dutch government, and he entered the army of the Holy Roman Emperor, because at that time started the so-called 30 Years' War, 1618, 1648, exactly for 30 years. So this was mainly the war between Protestants and Catholics. So at that time already this confession was important. So Descartes took the Catholic side, and he fought in the army of the Holy Roman Emperor. And it was in Bavaria in exactly this date, 10th of November 19 um, 1619, that he had his three famous dreams. And after seeing these dreams, he understood that his vocation was a vocation of a philosopher. Well, what were those dreams? They are described by René Descartes himself in his private notebooks. Well, the first dream was about the the heavy wind, which somehow carried him uh, just like a leaf fallen from the tree. So he was carried by the storm, the stormy wind, and he found himself, and he was afraid because he was like carried like a leaf or like you see some light object, and he was carried by this stormy wind to some chapel, and he recognized the chapel of his of the Jesuits, the chapel in the of this college where he had his initial education. And then he also sensed a smell of a melon, and there was also some melon present here. So three things: the stormy wind, the chapel, and the melon. So for Freud, our psychoanalysis, this or Carl Jung, this is a broad field of sort of interpretation of this dream. How can you sort of combine melon, the chapel, and the stormy wind? In what do they all mean? But for him, this was the he didn't just give his own solution. He just described his dream. So this was the first dream. Well, he also felt a pain in his left side after this first dream, and he wanted to turn to the other side. He decided to turn to the other side, and he also said the prayer of sort of deliverance from evil spirits. Well, it seems that he was a believer. He believed in prayer. Maybe just was his what he was taught by the Jesuits, how to behave in certain circumstances. But this is interesting because now most people are not praying at all. So Descartes was praying. So he prayed and started to sleep again. And then he saw a second dream. This was a great thunder, and the uh, sparks were everywhere in the room. So, like thunder, how to say, thunder, lightning, and there are sparks all around the room. So only sparks and this heavy noise of thunder. This is the essence of the second dream. Then he again fell to sleep and saw a third dream. This was a book, what was put on the table, and he started. This was a book of some collection of verses, and he opened this book and saw a phrase, very interesting, quod vitae in Latin, sectabor iter. I will translate. Uh, But if you want to read the description of these dreams yourself, it's easier for you to just take this phrase in double commas, and then you will come across the scholarly book of the biography of René Descartes, where all these are explained. So, quod vitae sectabor iter, which means what way of life should I choose? What way of life should I choose? And this is a passage from a certain obscure poet, now obscure but known for philologists, Ausonius. You can also find uh, an article in Wikipedia about him. He is also translated into Russian, Avsony, a famous poet, I think of the 5th or 6th century. Christian poet, Christian Latin poet who lived in the south of France near the city of Bordeaux, which was at that time called Burdigallum. Well, Ausonius, okay. And he remembers Descartes that in his dream he was seeking for the phrase est et non, but it was not found in this book. So he was interested in the problem of being, because est et non means yes, is, and no, sort of. Well, uh, this means that either you exist or to be, like to be or not to be, est et non. Well, these were these dreams after which he thought that his vocation is to be a philosopher, to think about. Also, he describes that this his experience, that after these dreams he felt as if nothing was secure in life. So, well, maybe because those dreams happened when he was in a certain hut, isolated from the other people, and he sort of couldn't understand what is the difference between dream and reality. So he started this to doubt of everything. So, and in this process of doubting everything, he well, he felt that it was painful, this state of doubt, and he was afraid that some bad spirit is sort of eluding him. So he wanted to find some, as he later wrote, some point which was devoid of doubt, which was undoubtful, secure. And it seems that it seemed to him that the most secure proposition, which he cannot doubt anymore, was that I exist, therefore, well, I think, therefore I exist. Sort of cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I exist. Why was it devoid of doubt? Because you can doubt everything, but you cannot doubt that you are doubting. Okay, so and if you didn't exist, so you couldn't have doubts. So this existence is something sort of solid, something certain, that you exist. Doubting or not doubting, being eluded by a evil spirit or being not eluded, having dreams or having not dreams, but you are existing, whether you are dreaming or whether you are conscious, whether you are eluded or whether you are on the right way. But in all these circumstances, you continue to exist, and this existence is out of doubt. It is certain. Well, this is interesting that later David Hume and other skeptical philosophers started to doubt even this concept of I. What is my? Uh, for example, if I look at my photos when I was in the kindergarten, can I recognize myself? So of course I say this is me, but I have changed a lot, you see, since I was, say, 5 or 2 years old. So how can I say that it's the same man? Okay, what is personality? What is center of your personality? This David Hume, we'll speak about him maybe when we go to the 18th century. He called this I a bundle of perceptions. Okay, so there's no I, there's no me, there's no personality, no center, but there's only bundle of perceptions. The perceptions change, and with them change your identity, your personality. Okay, so this is of course possible for this skeptical approach. That's what I answer to Mykola Semenyakin. Are these doubts yours? So whether there's I identity, okay, sort of. This is interesting, but Descartes didn't doubt that. He considered that he thought that his idea of personality, his idea of his own ego, ego in Latin means I. So his idea of this ego is beyond all doubt. Okay, so he started to philosophize. He got the vocation of a philosopher. And at first he was a little bit afraid to go in public with his new thoughts, and he considered it more prudent to sort of hide his new sort of ideas under a certain mask. So he said, later he wrote in his private journals that entering this theater of the world, I hide my face under a mask, okay, like the actors, in order that nobody could see my red cheeks, which are sort of, this reddish color is formed by my well um, uh, well, in Latin it's pudor, but I think in Russian it's stid. But I think it's like there's some like the word in English also. Mm, uh, Shame, yes, okay. Simple word. It's what a shame, shame on me that I forgot this word shame, okay? From shame, you can have red cheeks. So you cover your face, as actors cover their faces with masks. So this Descartes decided to do, to hide himself. Also, he used to say, uh, good lived a man who hided himself better. Okay, bene vixit qui bene latuit. So good life had a man who was good in hiding himself. Okay, and that's why he went to Holland. He didn't want to stay in France. he decided to go to Holland and live there as a private citizen. But Holland was at that time a country prominent for so-called freedom of conscience. So you could remain a Catholic and live there and possess all the rights that other citizens possess. Well, of course, public services for Catholics were prohibited, so he stayed without the church. So he couldn't visit the church, but nobody insisted on his changing his confession. So he remained a Catholic, and he lived in Protestant Holland, and he was out of reach of Roman Inquisition. Okay. Well, for why it was so important for him? Because at that time he already planned the work which he wanted to call On the World, or in Latin, De Mundo, on the world. Uh, but he didn't write it because got the news about the condemnation of Galileo and was very much afraid that he would be also condemned and sort of um, excommunicated from the church. He didn't want it, so he didn't want the scandal. Even if personally he would remain sort of out of prison, because in Holland nobody will implement the decrees of the Roman Inquisition, but he still didn't want to be proclaimed a heretic. Okay, so he decided not to write this work on the world and preferred to pursue his studies of analytical geometry, optics, and so on. But then the situation has somehow changed, and he decided, well, why? Because he became prominent due to his other works, which were, first of all, Discourse on the Method. Discourse on the Method. This was published in um, in 1637 in French. Not in Latin. It was published in French in 1637, and this work made him famous. What is this Cartesian method, or method of Descartes? So first of all, to doubt everything and somehow to start from the scratch. Okay, then follow only the how to say certain judgments. So don't allow that in your line of thoughts be introduced some dubious ideas. Only certain and somehow well, clear, how to say, clear, yes, clear and certain ideas. Okay, clear. This is a Cartesian ideal of clarity, you know, Cartesian clarity. Okay, do you know this word, Cartesian clarity? So what I want in my lecture but never attain, uh, you know, to be clear, not to remain obscure. Okay, so all things that I say should be clear to me and to my audience. Later, Descartes said that he wanted his philosophy to be so clear as to be understood even by the Turks. Well, you would say Turks. Well, what did he mean? He didn't mean a nationality. And if there are some Turks listening to me, let them not be scandalized. It's not about nationality. It's about confession. So, because people who confess Islam are a little bit skeptical about Christianity, okay, especially Christian theology. So he wanted to speak in such a way that even Muslims can follow his line of thought and not be scandalized, okay? Well, now we can continue and say he Cartesian clarity means that even atheists can follow his line of thought. Even Jews can follow his line of thought. So people of every uh, confession, of every religion, of even the Chinese, you understand, can follow. So this is a new ideal. So to make yourself clear and understandable to everyone, okay? uh, this is a ideal of a scientist. You see, now if you deliver a presentation, it seems that you can be understood by people of different nationalities, different cultural backgrounds, different sexes, different colors of their skin. Okay, so no prejudices are allowed here. So, well, if a person has a prejudice against clarity, then nothing can be done, of course. If a person doesn't want to be logical, so Descartes is helpless to change these people. So, of course, he addresses himself to people who want to be logical, who want to find the truth. So, this is the audience, potential audience of Descartes. But clarity is very important. So, this is the essence of his method. Well, this work made him famous, and then he wrote another work, this time in Latin. It was called Meditaciones de Prima Filosofia. Well, I just would like to dwell on this uh, title because it is important, and it deals with um, de, sorry, de prima filosofia. It deals with the subject of definition of philosophy. Uh, or meditations on the first philosophy, meditaciones de prima filosofia, or in English, meditations on the first philosophy. First of all, meditations. What are these meditations? You know that Socrates gave the definition of philosophy is meditation on death. Or, well, meditation, it's a translation of Greek word melete, which means preoccupation. In the first meaning of this word melete, melete, uh, melete in Greek. Well, unfortunately I don't have Greek characters here, but melete means preoccupation, but it is usually translated into Latin as meditatio, or in English meditation. What is that? Meditation is like a profound um, concentration of your attention on some subject. So this art of meditation is art to be engrossed or to be preoccupied with only one subject. That's why it's also can be called preoccupation. Okay, so meditation. Then Socrates defined philosophy as meditation on death, so preoccupation with death. So you will die, so you should think only about that death that is imminent, that is certain, and all other subjects are sort of have to fade away. So you have to concentrate on this life and death issue. Okay, it's perhaps now it is maybe um, important that we have this pandemic, so people are somehow also preoccupied with life and death issues. But of course, it can be done in every situation. So, well, of course, in because Descartes was a soldier also, so he was constantly in danger of death while just fighting, uh, especially during the war. Okay, so yes, of course, it was it was disputed by many, starting from David Hume, then by Immanuel Kant, and then by Hegel. So there is a tradition of criticism of Cartesian philosophy, of course, but let us now just take it as it is. So, well, you know, there's also Socratic method, this maethetics. It's also, of course, can be disputed, and it's also, of course, is subjective. And also Cartesian clarity, the same. But you can choose this as your strategy. Okay, you are allowed to choose these two strategies: mathematical method of Socrates and Cartesian clarity of René Descartes. So this is you are allowed to do that on your own initiative, and of course you should put sort of um, well, you should risk your own reputation. Okay, so you will have the reputation of Cartesian philosopher. Of course, this will somehow change your maybe your future or your academic position. Maybe some people will see that you are too dogmatic in your Cartesian clarity, or I don't know, but you can choose this strategy. For me, it's optimal, I think, because I different people with the so I want to find some, because if I would be not clear, then perhaps I wouldn't be understood by so broad an audience with many foreigners. Not all of them, not all my listeners are Russians. There were, on my experience, Chinese, Indians, Iranians, Egyptians, uh, Mex people from Mexico, from Spain, from Italy, and so on, from Germany. So you should be understood by everybody. Here, Cartesian clarity can help a lot. Well, now, returning to these meditations on the first philosophy. So this book was published in Latin in 1641 in Paris, not in Holland. The first book, Discourse on the Method, was published in French in Holland. Now he dared to publish the book in France. He was a bit afraid, but so he used the certain continuation of this title. So it was called Meditations on the First Philosophy, in which there will be proved the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. So he wanted to prove these two important, how to say, truths: the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. And he devoted the whole his work, Meditations on the First Philosophy, to the theologians of the Sorbonne College of Paris University. Paris University had many colleges. Sorbonne College, now you say Sorbonne as a synonym of Paris University, but at that time Sorbonne College was the name only of theological department of Paris University. There were other departments. So he so he addressed this work to the theologians of the Sorbonne College, dedicated it to them. And and he said that it was his task to prove these two important truths: the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. And if he would prove it clear for all, then it would make better the situation in Europe. So because they're in this situation of a conflict between Protestants and Catholics, these two ideas sort of could unite all men in a new brotherhood. Okay, well, it was a little bit suspiciously taken by the theologians, but still it was published because in France, you know, this This is the year in which I remind you, the Latin translation of Galileo's Dialogue of Two World System was published in Latin in Lyon. So the same year there was published this work of Descartes in Latin in Paris. So, but all those books that appeared on the territory of France were to be subject to the censorship of the king, not of the church, but of the king. So, with the permission of the king. So, every book which was published in France had this inscription on it, with the permission of the king. So, the king was the highest sort of judge of all that is published. So this book was published with the permission of the king in Paris, and it established Descartes' reputation in France. But he still remained in Holland. He didn't move to France. He stayed in Holland. So he sort of observed what would be the reaction of the church to these two books, the Discourse on the Method and these Meditations on the First Philosophy. Why? Because in both these books, he started from doubting everything. And perhaps it was not very good from the standards of Christian thinking, because you know that Jesus reproached Peter, "Why have you doubted?" When he was starting to drown in the lake. You see, because so if a person is doubting, then it's no good. So you have to possess firm faith. So this idea of doubt could seem very doubtful, okay, to play the words for Christian theologians. So Descartes, of course, understood that and was a little bit afraid how these books would be received by the church. But when he saw that nothing happened, he dared to publish in Amsterdam his third book, the most important from our point of view, in Latin, which was called Principia Philosophiae, or the elements or the principles of philosophy. Philosophia. Well, you know that the book of Euclid also is called sometimes the Principles, but usually it is translated as the elements. Because in original Greek it is called stoicheia. So stoicheia is this Greek for element. So Euclid had elements. Now we have principia or principles in plural. Principium is singular. Principia are plural. Okay, Noreen, yes, there's a lack of my Cartesian clarity here. So I have to, you see, in France, you should just pay, how to say, should somehow understand the history of France. It's very complicated. You remember the Saint Bartholomew massacre in Paris, how Catholics started to exterminate or the Protestants in I think it was 1572. St. Bartholomew's massacre. So there were so-called religious wars in France, which started, I think, in the middle of the 16th century. I don't know. Bartholomew massacre. Well, I'm not sure that I'm writing it correctly, but massacre is like pogrom in Russian, okay? So this word became international. It's usually associated with Jewish pogroms, but You can also use this word everywhere. So when, or maybe ethnic cleansing, or, but it's not ethnic, it's a religious war. French fought against the French. French Protestants fought against French Catholics. It all ended when Henry IV, who was Protestant, changed his religion, became Catholic, and entered Paris. I think it was in 1589. Yes, later, of course, France became secular after the French Revolution, but at that time it became nominally Catholic. But there was a certain Nantes edict which allowed Protestants to have freedom of faith in France, even the academies. So this situation of so-called tolerance was sort of took place during the whole 17th century. Later, Louis XIV sort of abolished this Nantes edict and sort of robbed the Protestants of all their liberties. So they had to emigrate to different countries, to Holland, to Germany, to Russia even, well, to America. So, uh, but in the 17th century, during the life of Descartes, there was a situation of a certain tolerance. And of course, the Pope was not happy with that, but the King of France insisted on his privileges, and was the relations between Rome and Paris were terse, but the Pope couldn't recognize the privileges of the king because he was afraid that that France will just proclaim independence of the French Church. So this is called Gallicanism. There was a tendency in France to sort of separate itself from the Catholic Rome, like the Anglicans in England. They also separated themselves from Rome. There's an Anglican church, so the popes were afraid that there would be a Gallican church, like something like the Anglican church. So they were a little bit tolerant to the kings, and somehow wanted to come to terms with the kings, and the kings insisted on their own censorship, on their own politics, and so that's the books in France were published with the uh, royal censorship and not with the church censorship. So you remember Cardinal Richelieu and his role of a diplomat between Rome and the king. So this situation is very, very complicated. Yes, the proof of God, you remember the third lecture, the ontological proof, which is based on the clarity of the conception itself. So Descartes didn't start his proof from, say, nature or its complexity of living nature, or argument from design, he started with this conception of God, which he considered to be so clear and so self-evident that, and so devoid of contradictions, that it should have existed because of its clear nature. Okay, so all clear concepts should exist somehow. But the existence is like a mathematical existence. For example, do you believe in square, in the existence of this figure which we call square? Or you say that this figure is impossible? Well, you will say you believe in squares, only you don't believe that these squares have bodies. But who insists that God has a body? So you see, the idea of God is kind of a mathematical God. We'll speak about that later, perhaps, because, for example, Blaise Pascal, who was a mystic, he said that his God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not the God of philosophers and scientists, just alluding to the God of René Descartes. So this God is metaphysical God. It's like a concept of necessary being, okay? So, well, for Descartes, it seemed clear. Maybe now we see that it's not so clear. So, Cartesian clarity is under question, okay? Now, but now we doubt everything. Uh, Even in mathematics, we have paradoxes of theory of multitudes, and that's um, um, there are paradoxes in logic. There is Gödel's theorem. So, that's difficult now to find something that you couldn't object against. So, well, for Descartes himself, it was obvious. Well, about the immortality of the soul, he later changed the title of his book when it was republished in Holland in the next year in 1642, the same book, I mean the Meditations on the First Philosophy. It bore the title Meditations on the First Philosophy, in which the existence of God and the difference of soul from body is proved. So he didn't prove the immortality of the soul, because he understood that it's impossible to prove, but he proved the lesser truth, that the soul is something distinct from the body, okay? So the spiritual nature of the soul. Now we return to his principles of philosophy that were published in, I mean, 1642 is the date of the second edition of the Meditations. But now we come to the date 1644, when in Amsterdam, in Holland, was published his book Principles of Philosophy, in which he decided to speak on, I'm sorry, on his cosmology. So now we have Cartesian cosmology, which is the most important part because it influenced Newton. Cartesian cosmology. Well, I will describe it very briefly because only 20 minutes are left. But I think it is because we are tending to it. Well, okay. So it starts with optics, I would say. And mental experiment. Descartes suggests us to regard our sun from a distant star. Okay, so mentally sort of place yourself at some distant star and imagine what would be our sun look like if you regard it from a distant star. Well, Descartes says, according to optics, the law of optics, our sun will seem like a little insignificant star if you regard it from other stars, okay? So now, what is the use of placing this little insignificant star in the center of the world? It's no use, because our sun is not better than any other star, okay? Only the difference is that it is closer to us, the inhabitants of the planet Earth. But it's not, well, in a cosmical perspective, it's nothing, because it's only our subjective view of our cosmos. So with sort of, and then he says that therefore there is no center of the world, and our sun is by no means in the center of the world. Why did he stress this thesis? He wanted to sort of immune himself from this accusation of formal heresy, because you remember that if you have listened to the previous part of this lecture, you remember that uh, uh, Cardinal Bellarmine proclaimed that thesis that the sun is in the center of the world is heretical. So, as heretical. So, if you insist that the world is finite, spherical, and in the center of this finite world there is the sun, you are a heretic. So you cannot defend this thesis, otherwise you risk to be excommunicated from the church for heresy. Well, you see, Descartes lived in Holland. Why he was so afraid? In Holland, nobody would arrest him, okay? There was no Roman Inquisition in Holland. But he was afraid to be excommunicated from his religion. He wanted to remain a Catholic and to be buried as a Catholic. So he was fighting for his reputation, okay? That's why he was very glad that he avoided accusation in formal heresy. Now, what about the movement of the earth? Well, he said modestly, in my cosmology, there is no idea of absolute quietness. So everything is moving and it depends on the system of reference. If and he gives an example. If you move from Pas de Calais to London, say, you cross the channel or the Strait of Dover. Okay, so you cross the channel between England and France. Okay, so if you are moving in a boat, it would seem to you that France is moving and England moving far from you, and England shores of England are approaching. So it depends on in what system of reference you look at the motion. So he said that perhaps in some systems of reference our Earth could seem as moving, but this is not absolute motion. So, I didn't know whether it satisfied the church authorities, but after the publication of these principles of philosophy in Amsterdam in 1644, nothing happened. So, Descartes was not accused of heresy. Well, he started with new initiatives. He started with publishing a book about the passions of the soul, uh, passions of the soul in French, I think. Uh, this is a book in psychology. Uh, and then he was invited to Stockholm to the queen of a young queen of Sweden called Christina. Christina. Uh, uh, she invited him to Stockholm to teach her philosophy. So, because she was a queen and a young one, and Sweden was at that time a very powerful country uh, who almost won the 30 Years' War, the Swedish troops sacked, for example, Munich and other German cities. So, Swedes were noted for their um, one of the best armies in Europe. You remember that later Peter the Great would fight with Sweden, and there would be at first he would lose the battles with the Swedes. Also, Swedes attacked Poland, and so the Swedes were terrible. You know? And so Descartes was very much sort of um, um, he thought that perhaps his mission to Sweden could pacify the whole Europe. So he went to Sweden, to Stockholm, in autumn of 1648. But in February 1650, he fell ill and died from pneumonia. Well, when from the reminiscences of the priest, of the French Catholic priest who was a chaplain of the French embassy in Stockholm, we know that Descartes went to communion and to confession on the 2nd of February. uh, February. Um, Maybe he was not ill at that time, he fell ill later. So on the 2nd of February 1650, Descartes went to confession and communion. And he was not denied communion, and he was absolved of his sins because nobody found any heresy in his books. So you see, he won this battle with the church censorship. So the French uh, priest could freely absolve him of his sins because he was not publicly proclaimed a suspect in heresy. Okay, then he felt ill and he died. It seems it was 11th of February or 9th of February. I don't exactly remember the date. And the same priest came to him and gave him last rites or last communion, last confession and absolution of all his sins. So he died a good Catholic, and he was buried in a Catholic church. So everything went smoothly with him. But after his death, the church started to question his orthodoxy, and his books, Meditations on the First Philosophy and Principles of Philosophy, were put on the index. So they were put into the index of prohibited books. So this was a kind of a censorship. But personally, Descartes was never accused of heresy and was not excommunicated or proclaimed a heretic after his death. So his reputation remained immune because he was very, very shrewd. He avoided this formal, well, not because he was insincere. He sincerely believed that there is no such position as the center of the world. The world became kind of infinite. Well, Descartes himself didn't insist on infinity of the world. He preferred to use the Latin word indefinitum, which is indefinitely large. Definitum. What it doesn't mean that it is um, infinite, absolutely infinite. But it doesn't seem that it is closed or finite. So indefinitum is like a compromise. Indefinitely large is a compromise between infinity and uh, just closeness of the world. Okay, so it was neither the closed world of Aristotle or Copernicus, neither it was infinite like the world of Newton. Now, just have a last look on Newton's work, Philosophia Naturalis, which was published in Latin. The first edition was in Latin. Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica. Principia Mathematica. And compare it with the title of Descartes' book, of René Descartes' book, Mathematica. So what is added? Two words remain. Principia, philosophia remain. But what is added? To philosophy is added adjective naturalis, which means natural. So it is not just philosophy, but natural philosophy. And to principles are added the adjective mathematica, which is mathematical principles. When later this book was published in English translation, and it's called Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Okay, but in English version, it's not so easy to compare it with the book of Descartes, because in Latin original, it's which was published in 1687, it's easier to understand what is the difference and what is common with Descartes' book. What is common is this absence of absolute system of reference and absence of center of the world. So Newton also didn't insist that our sun is in the center of the world. It's only in the center of the solar system. But the main difference, of course, is the explanation of the rotational movement of the planets. With René Descartes, it remained unexplainable because Descartes used the notion of vortexes. But these vortexes were like uh, just natural phenomena which needed no other explanation. With Newton, not only vortices, but there were elliptical characters of the orbits of the planets established already by Kepler, whom we skipped unfortunately today. And he managed to explain the elliptical character of the orbits by two presuppositions. This the conservation of momentum and the law of universal gravity. So these were new things which Descartes which are absent from the book of René Descartes. Okay, so Newton was made a step further. And also Newton spoke about the infinite space, and he sort of associated it with a sensorium Dei, like uh, uh, through this infinite space, God sort of sensorium senses everything that happens in the world. Well, why the concept of God was important for Newton? Well, I think because he uh, wanted this law and order in the universe, and he considered God to be the uh, guarantee a being who guarantees law and order in the solar system and in all the world. Okay, that's why he wrote a corollary about God in this his book Natural Principles of oh no, sorry, uh, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Well, that's basically all. So we came to Newton, and with Newton we have already modern science, mathematics as a language of in which the book of nature is written. So, well, of course, it started with Galileo. It's the phrase that the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics is Galileo's quote, and it was formulated in Italian. But now Newton proved that it is so. Also, um, uh, well, infinity of the universe, infinite number of stars, which of course created some paradoxes, like gravitational paradox, which will be solved eventually only by Albert Einstein in his concept of finite universe, in which he formulated in frames of his general theory of relativity in 1917. So we had to wait for 300 years or 250 years for all the paradoxes of the infinite universe to be solved. But still, it was a step further. Okay, in some sense, it was a return to the atomistic concept, well formulated by Democritus. But of course, because of this idea of force, force of gravity, it was of course a step forward. Well, a little bit less luck Newton had with forces of attraction because he couldn't explain their origin and where they come from. He was not an expert in electricity. So also we had to wait for the 19th century for Coulomb, the law of Coulomb, the law of sort of repulsion and attraction of uh, electrical charges in order to explain the how to say, the forces of attraction or adhesion, which are obvious but were not explained by Newton. Okay, because this adhesion, for example, and also repulsion, they were understandably out of, not of gravitational nature. So some new forces had to be introduced. Well, this is more or less the essence of the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Of course, many questions were skipped, and I hope we'll return to some of them on Thursday before we venture into the 18th century. So if there are any questions, unfortunately, only 4 minutes are left. And mostly, I think you are preoccupied with your exams and not with the contents of the course, which you more or less know from other sources. I mean, if you studied classical mechanics, for example, or calculus, you know about Newton perhaps even much more than me. Well, I also studied it while on physical faculty, but I forgot almost everything. So perhaps you know better and can better understand the amount of the contribution of Newton to modern science. I prefer to speak about Galileo and Descartes because they have connections with cultural sort of dimension of this revolution. Okay, so because it's not only for scientists, it's for everyone. Uh, those people who practice humanities, they don't understand perhaps what really did Newton do, but they of course understand the impact of Galileo and the impact of René Descartes, because these figures were like, well, sort of, they changed sensibly what we are accustomed to. So, well, that's perhaps all. I'm a little bit tired, so maybe I'm just starting to speak nonsense. So I think it's time to just finish the lecture. Okay, so thank you. Yes, stopped working for me. Ah, yes. Well, you can create a group ВКонтакте, and there you can make the list for uh, for exams. So you can subscribe for exam for a certain date. Is it okay, Гордеева? Are you already a member of the social network ВКонтакте or not? Yes, okay. Then just create a group, and there, there 90% of the information will be there. If somebody is not in contact, they can write to me privately on my email, or use the canvas. There's also this mailbox there. So I will be informed in case. I think I firmly believe in the theory of probability and in the law of large numbers. So I think everything will be all right. Okay, so good. And now, thank you for listening to me. I apologize for my mistakes and deficiencies, and hope to see you on Thursday with I hope with the slides. Yes. Okay, then goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Okay.